So you're a synesthete, you've got multiple types of synesthesia. Can you tell me more what types and what type is your, well, most enjoyable type?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think that whenever somebody asks me, it's sort of whatever synesthesia type that I'm feeling at the moment that I say is the most prevalent. And also, it's good to hear that you would say that it's enjoyable because I feel like a lot of times there's a misunderstanding that this is frustrating or scary, but it's just part of my reality all the time. And while sometimes it can get a little annoying, it's just part of how I perceive the world, and I wouldn't want it any other way. So I would say that probably the most important synesthesia type that I have is sound to visual, and that really helps me in my everyday life. It might not be so prevalent to me if I weren't a dancer and I wasn't listening to music all day, every day. But for me, because that is part of my job to listen to music and interpret it artistically on a daily basis, it really has become part of who I am. And interpreting music and listening to it and seeing the different colors and shapes and patterns that come from the different pieces that I work with every single day has become really important to me. And then I would say probably the most fun one is scent, scent to color, because I'm not really thinking about it often. I didn't even know that that was a synesthesia trait until a couple of years ago. And something that I like to do is smell candles and see what colors come out, because candle scents are very, very strong, and sometimes they're just absolutely beautiful colors.
Right.
Yeah.
And how was that? I mean, how did you first, what's your first recollection of your having synesthesia?
Yeah, I think I've always had it. I remember actually just early childhood memories. A lot of them are synesthesia memories, and I didn't realize that till I was in my 20s and realized what synesthesia was. For instance, I had a lot of earaches and ear infections as a child, and this wouldn't be a fun one, but I had tinnitus, and one of the things I remember was not necessarily the sound of tinnitus, but a very distinct red line whenever I would have that ringing noise. And that would be probably the earliest manifestation that I can remember. And I didn't say this, but before, one of the most, probably the most useful synesthesia trait is time sequence. For me, I never really understood growing up why I needed to have a calendar or a pocket calendar to write down my homework assignments, because it was always in my brain. I would have a sort of map of the whole year, a map of my week, a map of my days and times. And I wish it were a little bit better now that I have a lot of things to do, but I always have that, in my mind, what I'm supposed to do that day, what I'm doing next week. And that also translates into a timeline of my whole life. And so I can look back on what's already happened in each month, year. It's not super accurate, but I can see generally the time that things happened in the past. And as I look to the future, I see a color sequence all the way up. It sort of disappears in the future. And so that also is very useful when I have a lot of things to do.
Yeah, and those colors, I mean, speaking of those colors that you experience, is it something tangible? I mean, how do they feel? I mean, what do they feel like to you?
It's hard to explain. I think it would be, they're sort of on the same plane as when I imagine something. So if I were to imagine or think of a cat, I would have a visual image of a cat, not necessarily a specific cat that I've had, but a cat. And then that's sort of how it is when I think about time. I sort of have this imprint in my mind's eye of time in this very distinct image that's consistent. It's always been the same. Yeah.
And yeah, it's like something in your mind's eye. It's not something tangible like paint being, splashed around your body, but it's just something. Okay. And how was it for you when you first put a name to it?
It was pretty amazing because I finally realized why there were a couple instances where people didn't understand what I was talking about in my life. And that was pretty incredible because then I was like, oh, that's why you didn't understand what I was talking about, because I was being literal and other people would think I was poetic. And I wasn't. I was being completely literal of certain things. And so it's always been interesting to me also artistically when I see like performances by other people and maybe the costumes don't match the music or the lighting doesn't match the music. And I always thought growing up and in ballet school that that was an artistic choice to go against the color of the music. Sometimes I was like, wow, they're being really bold. This choreographer is amazing for, you know, stepping away from what the music color is, the music shapes are, and doing something completely opposite. And then when I realized that I was the only one seeing that music the way I see it, then it made more sense to me why someone would interpret that a different way.
Right. And being a choreographer now, right? You're slightly transitioning into a new line of your career. And is it difficult for you to make yourself understood in terms of how you would like to give guidance to your students or to your dancers?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's always a struggle for anybody, not just synesthetes, but having something, a vision in your mind that you want to come out on stage and being able to say that in a way that other people understand. Often I like to say it's a Harry Potter reference, but there's a pensieve where one of the characters takes the wand and takes all of their memories and thoughts and puts it into another vessel, and then somebody else takes it out. And I kind of want that because it's so much easier to just think of what you want, and then to be able to translate that into words is sometimes pretty difficult. But I enjoy that challenge. And especially for me, I can't just say, can you go to the, you know, the red part of the music and start from the beginning? I can't say that. I have to, you know, find the counts, and I have to make sure that it is, you know, I'm communicating in a way that other people can understand. So I have to translate my own vision of the music into actual words that other people get.
Yeah, well, on the same note, almost. Your paintings struck me as rather unusual because it's a mixture of realism, because it's still figurative. They are still figurative, but there are lots of like increments of something what might be called impressionistic elements. So how would you explain your style in painting, and how is your painting related to ballet?
Oh yeah. So my painting has always been, I've always been painting since I was very, very young. That was probably one of the first things I started doing. And I think for me, I like to show what I see in the world, my perceptions over what is actually there physically. Because in my personal opinion, if everyone's seeing the world differently, then no one can say that they're seeing it the correct way. Everyone is seeing it differently, so there actually is no correct way. It's just a combination of our senses going into our brain, and then we're processing it, and that's everyone's reality. So who can say what's right and wrong? And so for my art, I like to go by what's physically there, what I can touch and I know is actually in matter, and then maybe make a wash of what my other senses might perceive that other people might not see.
Okay. And are these paintings that probably your earlier paintings or something that you have now, do they reflect anything in terms of motion and body metaphors?
It depends on the piece. I really enjoy being very meticulous sometimes when I do portraits and doing things hyper realistically as a challenge. I really enjoy doing that because you can also take your time and really look at something in order to recreate it on a canvas. You have to understand exactly how that looks in real life. And so that for me is an exercise that I really like doing sometimes. But when I do my abstract art, that is more of a balancing technique, I guess. It's more about finding balance, and I will not really think about what I'm doing, and I'll just make the colors and make the movement. And sometimes I do line drawings and let my hand just do what it wants to do until it feels balanced. And once it's balanced, then I'll stop. And I can't really explain how that feels. I just know when it's done. Yeah.
Okay. And any ideas how to mix these impressions that you try to convey through your painting and your dancing and ballet?
Yeah, I think of the stage often. I have two sides of me right now. My classical ballet training and career. And then I've delved into a professional career in immersion theater, as I have always loved the theater. And so there's, the very specific, I like to think of it as a little music box of the stage, sometimes in ballet, where you create a scene and the whole stage is one canvas. And so it's my job as choreographer or director or even dancer to paint a picture for people to look at. And then as the immersion theater actor, it's my job to bring the audience into the story and make them part of the scene. And so now, as I am trying to sort of think about ways to combine the two, like how does that feel to be in the scene as someone who wasn't there when it was getting created as an audience member? Maybe that is that's sort of where I'm discovering new possibilities.
Okay. You know what? Your story, and every time I think about you and ballet and synesthesia, for some reason, it reminds me of Michael Baryshnikov's heartbeat dance.
I
You
saw
remember?
that
Yes,
in
this famous
person.
one in Boston, and yes, and I thought that probably, this is my idea, synesthesia works as so biological feedback for you as a dancer, as heartbeat worked for Baryshnikov when he performed this heartbeat dance. So, well, do you think that synesthesia is a form of neurological biofeedback when your body and your mind tries to reconnect you to music? And what do you think we can do about it, like having it like a biological feedback?
Yeah, that's so amazing that you referenced that performance, because as a child, my mom actually took me to see that particular performance in the Bay Area. And I lived in a really small town, so we went to the Bay Area to see this, and I was just riveted by what it was. And I really had no real prior experience with that type of dance. And so to see that on the stage and hear that heartbeat, it felt like it was your heartbeat too, in a way. And so it was pretty incredible. That is one performance that stuck with me all these years. Just the creativity, but also the way it affected you, because everyone has a heartbeat. So it was very relatable too. So that was amazing that you referenced that. And in terms of my the neurological connection with the body, that's sort of why I made it. To me, it's kind of funny, we have a lot of mind body connections of it's kind of a slogan here of yoga or different practices that we have. And so that's why I took that and put it mind body connections for the piece that I'm doing now, because one of the synesthesia traits that I found I have is mirror touch. It's not very, very pronounced, but I do have a bit of it. And so feeling a little bit of what other people feel, if they touch their face, I feel that sometimes. And that is incredible that it doesn't even have to be you who's feeling something to feel something someone else is feeling. So we have all these different connections that we're not always aware of, but we're still feeling them. So, when someone who is physically not you experiences something, you can still have that connection. It's pretty amazing. So I love exploring that.
And when you have this mirror touch or experience instances, uh, how involving is it for you to get like a second loop of doing the same with your viewer and with yourself? And I mean, how isolating or again uniting this for you and your audience?
Um, well, it's for me, it's not super pronounced, that certain synesthesia, but I think that's something that I have to be really conscious of if I'm choreographing, because people can feel the exhilaration of dancers on stage, even if they're sitting down. They can feel the energy that they have. If a dance is quiet or slow and it's low energy, they're going to feel that in the audience. And so it really is an immersion into what the dancers are doing on stage, even if you're watching them from a little far away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
your
yeah.
yes, and your relations to other living,
Mhm.
because you're kind of a sideline, or probably it's already become a major line in your life, is something related to nature and ecological crisis on the planet or on
Mhm.
our Earth. So, is it somehow related to you, you with other living beings?
Yeah, it's funny, but like I just I just adopted a cat, two cats. And it's incredible how after a couple of days you can really have a connection with another creature. You don't speak the same language, but you know what they're thinking. And in the world, I just feel like we have a responsibility to not trash it. We're not the only people here. And the climate crisis is something I've tried to explore in my past works, and it's so upsetting for me to be thinking about it all the time. When I go into a work of art, the subject matter, I just envelop myself in it. And the climate crisis is so big, and sometimes you feel helpless. And so, for this piece, just to be thinking about the senses and sensory input and output and connections and not have a different theme has been also interesting for me, because now I'm immersed in this world. Whereas, some of the other subject matters I've had are the women's movement and then the climate disaster. And those are external forces that you need other people to work with each other to combat or address. But this piece that I'm doing now, the mind body connections, is different because it's internal and everyone is different. So it's very different for me to do this piece.
Yeah, well, it's so touching. Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
And when you think of movement generally,
Mhm.
or when you have insights and intuition about
Mhm.
what to do next on
Mhm.
stage, how to move or how to make people move as a choreographer. So your
Mhm.
intuition and your insight are related to synesthesia. So
Mhm.
what comes first, color in your synesthetic experience, or movement in the idea of movement?
Um, it's hard to say because I only say that sound triggers the visual aspect of synesthesia because I only have that type of synesthesia when I listen to music. But it's not like one happens and the other comes. They're simultaneous. Those two senses are stimulated at the same time. So when it comes to dance, if I begin a piece by listening to music, there's already a flow, a visual flow to the music. And that translates. Sometimes I go against it because I want it to be different. But often, if I go with the synesthesia, it sort of happens to go into the ballet steps, which also have a particular movement of their own. And it's just sort of putting together the puzzle of what steps go with the pattern that's already there. And I used to think that was cheating. And then again, I realized other people didn't see that. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to tap into that a lot now because it is unique. It's not something that other people would necessarily put onto the stage. It's something that only I can experience. Even other synesthetes would see it different. So
And speaking of your audience and yourself as a creator, as a choreographer, what would your perfect piece of ballet or any dancing piece be like?
Wow, I don't know. I think I try not to go with perfection a lot of the time. I try to get as close to my reality as possible, and mostly I'm interested not so much in what they're seeing, what the audience is seeing on the stage. That's not necessarily to me the most important of how it looks. It's more of how they feel while they're watching it and how they feel when they leave. So for me, the experience that they have is more important. If they feel what I want them to feel in the moment and after that memory, because again, I have that timeline. So a lot of times I won't even think about what I'm doing in the moment. I think I really want to make this a good memory because I get to look at this for the rest of my life. And so I think about what I want the audience to feel inside and how I want their body sensation to be. And if they had synesthesia, what I want them to smell when they watch this and how I want them to perceive this on different levels. And if they can feel any one of those things, even just an emotion, then I've succeeded in some way.
Okay, okay. Well, sounds great. So at least we bridge this gap between subjective and objective in this relation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we don't know who of belly dancers or ballerinas wore synesthetes because, well, people are not outspoken about it because probably it's just beyond their experience or knowledge. But
Yeah.
you have your own models and you have your own experience of your colleagues. So who of them, of all those ballet stars, might feel like being a synesthete and why?
I just don't know. I think that I met a couple dancers who perceive music similar to the way I do. And so we have that connection. But I think because of the stigma that still, there's a lot of stigma about being different, about having different neurology. People aren't very educated or accepting of people who are I mean, there's no other way to say it, are different or are not neurotypical, or even who look different or you act different. It's very difficult to stand up and say, hey, I see the world this way. And so it's really incredible sometimes when I meet somebody to have that connection and be able to talk about it. But oftentimes it's something that is hard to bring up, or to even start a conversation about, because if somebody is in a synesthete, they've probably never heard of it. And if they have, then it's intriguing, but it's hard to relate or understand the other person sometimes. So I honestly don't know very many other dancers at all. Maybe four. And then
Right.
the yeah.
And whose style of dancing to you, very subjectively, feels like the most synesthetic?
I'm not really sure. It's hard to say because I wouldn't say that any of them don't feel synesthetic from what I've performed, because it's all to music and it's all interpretation to music, or sound, because sounds have patterns and colors as well. So unless a choreographer would say something that sounded particularly synesthetic, I would have no clue what they're thinking of or what their intention is, because no one has ever said anything like that to me. No one's ever said like, this is the green section. I mean, a lot of times there will be green sections or blue sections to a piece, but do I know if that's synesthesia or not? No, because that could just be an aesthetic choice of the choreographer or director. So I would really have no idea. And also, being a dancer, it's your job to just be a body on stage and create the visual that the director would like you to do. that's your job. And so you don't necessarily have, you know, the opportunity to question what they're thinking. I mean, oftentimes they'll give you a lot of background, which is perfect, and then you take what you hear from them, and you know, if they want something different, they'll tell you. But I've never really had any instances where someone said, you know, follow the pattern, and it seemed like a synesthesia association. So I wouldn't have any reference to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the enigmas about synesthesia. So being an inspiration subjectively, it's still lurking somewhere behind the scenes. And yeah, we know lots about synesthetes artists and synesthete musicians, and still, if they do not mention about their phenomenon and condition, you would never guess that there is. So you need to go out and just to be explicit about them.
Yeah, I would never know. I mean, I have a list of, you know, you can Google it. There's a lot of current, especially musicians who have synesthesia, who talk about it, but they don't talk about it very much. And it's just sort of, I think of it as sort of like this little superpower that you keep in your back pocket, and it's not something that people would really share all the time.
Right. And this event in September, the Journey Through the Senses supports and helps organize as well. So what is it about, and what's the inspiration behind it?
So for this, I'm really excited by this. I have some incredible dancers who've joined me to create this work, and I'm doing a recreation of one of the pieces I've done in the past. And so I am taking material that I've used before, and I'm reinventing it for the space that I'm going to be in. I think it's really important to, you know, if you have a different theater or you have a different space, to adapt to that space and not just keep it very rigid. So I have, for this time that I'm doing this, a lot more room on the stage. So I'm going to make everything bigger and change the lighting. And I'm excited about that, working with other artists for that. And then for the new piece that I'm creating, I am delving into the different types of synesthesia that I personally have at varying levels experience with all of them, but this would be something that, you know, someone might have one or two, or someone might have none, or someone might have all of them. And so I wanted to touch on about 5 different types of synesthesia, and each one gets a little vignette. And for that one, it's important to me to have different dancers prominent in each piece, because and this is also a synesthesia trait that I didn't know about till later, a lot of times there's a personality with material as well. So maybe someone's personality would be better for a certain section. And so it's just awesome that I have these incredible dancers joining me for this project and embracing the subject matter, and we're all learning together. And because of course, like, not being synesthetes, a lot of my colleagues, I love listening to their experience, because it's just as foreign to me to hear how they perceive the world as it is for them to hear about mine. I don't really feel as though it's a one-way street of me just being different. They're also very different to me, and it's really incredible to hear their stories of how they interpret the music, or the movements, or feelings, or, you know, sensory input with touch. And so it's pretty cool for me. I get to hear about other people too.
And what would your message be, the most important message that you would like to convey through this event and during this event to your audience?
I've thought a lot about this, and I think for me, I really like learning. Learning is really exciting for me. Like I said, I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues, especially going into this creative process. And so I just want the audience to come in with an open mind and heart, just like I'm going into this. I mean, I'm very nervous about sharing my perceptions, but I would love to put a positive spin on being neurodivergent, and show people that it's a positive thing rather than a negative thing, and that we should embrace how people think at all levels, at all different ways, because everyone is just a little different. And I'm just sharing my perspective and how I go through life. And I hope they like it. Yeah.